The person you trusted for 32 years stands across the room, looks you straight in the eye, and tells you every dollar is gone. What cuts deeper, the loss itself or the lie wrapped around it? Before we begin, take a second to like this video and subscribe if you're drawn to stories of betrayal, hidden truths, and the moment when everything shifts. And while you listen, drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I always find it interesting to see where these stories land. My wife, Lauren Briggs, stood in the kitchen with her back half turned to the window. The pale morning light cut across her face in a way that made her look like two different people at once. One was the woman I had shared a life with, familiar, known. The other was unreachable, composed, distant, arranged. "It's all gone," she said quietly. "Every cent." She didn't look at me when she said it. That was the first sign something was wrong. Not the words themselves, the way she delivered them. Lauren had never been the type to soften bad news by hiding behind silence or posture. When my father passed, she looked directly at me and told me before anyone else could. When I lost my job at 43, she sat across from me at our kitchen table and said, "We'll get through it, but don't pretend this won't be hard." That was who she had always been. Direct, steady, unsentimental when it mattered most. So when she kept her eyes lowered, fixed somewhere near the edge of the granite countertop, I felt something cold slide beneath my ribs. "Are you sure?" I asked. A pause. Not the kind where someone is searching for details, the kind where someone is deciding which answer to give. Then she nodded. "I checked everything." She said nothing more. Not because I believed her, and not because I was in shock. I stayed quiet because the bank had already called me that morning at 8:17. And ever since then, I had been carrying a private fracture inside my chest. What the man on the phone told me didn't match this scene. It didn't match Lauren's tone. It didn't match her stillness. Age teaches you certain things if you live long enough. One of them is this: people rarely lie with words first. They lie with timing, with posture, with what they avoid saying. I watched her hands. She was gripping the counter hard enough for her knuckles to go white. There was a slight tremor in her fingers, small, nearly invisible, but there. Lauren was not someone who trembled easily. In arguments, she grew quieter, not weaker. In grief, she became precise. I had seen her walk through hospital corridors with her spine straight while others fell apart around her. If she was shaking now, it meant something had slipped past the defenses she had spent a lifetime building. "David," she said finally, letting out a breath that sounded rehearsed rather than genuine. "I didn't want to tell you like this." Still no eye contact. That was the second thing, and it landed deeper. There is a particular loneliness in standing across from someone you have loved for most of your life and realizing they are not speaking to you. They are managing you, preparing your reaction, adjusting themselves for impact. The kitchen suddenly felt too vivid. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the clock above the pantry, the coffee cup by the sink with lipstick still drying on the rim, the smell of toast gone cold. Everything ordinary remained exactly where it belonged, and that made the dishonesty in the room feel even more offensive. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it enters quietly, wearing routine like a mask. I looked at Lauren and thought about all the years behind us, not sentimentally, sharply. The first apartment with the broken radiator, the overtime shifts, the mortgage scare in 2009, the vacations we postponed because the roof needed repairs, because the car needed work, because real life always came first. We had built our security the ordinary way, carefully, slowly, through discipline and repetition. That was the word pressing on me now. Not money, trust. Money can disappear through fraud, error, bad timing, bad luck. But this feeling, the chilling certainty that something in her had already turned away from me before this moment, came from somewhere else. When you've been married long enough, you learn the difference between truth and performance. Truth has weight, even when it's ugly. Performance is smoother. It edits itself while speaking. It offers emotion in controlled doses. Standing there a few feet from the woman who knew my habits, my silences, my limits, I understood with a clarity I didn't want that she was performing for me. That realization didn't make me angry right away. Anger would have been easier. What I felt first was colder than anger. Recognition. Because suddenly, the money was no longer the only thing missing. The call had come while the house was still holding the quiet of ordinary life. Coffee on the burner, light creeping across the dining room floor. The kind of hour when a man still believes his day belongs to him. I nearly let the phone ring out when I saw the bank's number. We had no late notices, no open disputes, no reason for urgency. I answered expecting an inconvenience. Instead, I heard a measured male voice. "Mr. Cole, this is James Whitmore from Harbor Trust. I'm sorry to call so early, but I felt you should know there were multiple transfer attempts on your joint account this morning." For a second, the sentence simply didn't settle into reality. Transfer attempts belong to other people, careless people, reckless people, victims in warning stories, not us, not the life Lauren and I had built. "Attempts?" I asked. "Yes, sir. Large ones, unusual enough to trigger our fraud protocols." I straightened in my chair. "Were they successful?" A pause. It carried weight. One was partially completed before we froze the account. The rest were blocked. My hand tightened around the phone. I remember staring out the kitchen window without seeing the yard beyond it. In a few seconds, my mind ran everywhere at once. Identity theft, data breach, stolen passwords, hacked email, every explanation except the one I asked next. Who authorized them? The silence that followed was different, more delicate, more human. "Your wife's credentials were used." That was the moment something inside me shifted, not shattered. Broken things announced themselves. This felt quieter than that, like a hidden mechanism locking into place. Betrayal doesn't always explode. Sometimes it moves with terrible efficiency, like a door closing softly behind you. You only understand you're trapped when the handle no longer turns. I asked the necessary questions: amount, destination, status, review process. James gave me facts, and facts can be more merciless than accusations. The transfer had originated through Lauren's online credentials. The pattern suggested deliberate action, not random breach activity. The attempts were structured, sequential, escalating. Someone trying to move as much as possible before the system intervened. Deliberate. That word stayed with me long after the call ended. So by the time Lauren stood in front of me later and said,
"Hello?"
"It's all gone," I was already listening past the words. Then she finally turned toward me and looked me in the eye. "I don't know what happened," she said. "Maybe the bank made a mistake. Maybe someone hacked us." And for one dangerous second, I almost felt compassion, because she did look afraid. Not wildly, not theatrically. No screaming, no collapse. Her fear was narrower than that. It sat around her mouth, behind her eyes, in the slight delay before each sentence. And because I had loved her for more than half my life, some old reflex in me still moved toward her fear instead of away from it. Marriage builds that reflex. Years of illness, funerals, bills, disappointments, repairs, and ordinary survival teach you to respond to the other person's distress before you judge it. But then I remembered James's voice, careful, professional, certain. That certainty stripped the softness out of the moment. Lauren was not standing there as a confused woman caught in a financial disaster. She was measuring what I knew. I could see it in the way she spoke. The hesitation before bank, the quick use of maybe to blur every sentence. She wasn't offering facts. She was offering fog. This wasn't a mistake, and she wasn't confused. She was trying to see whether she still had enough room to shape the lie. I walked past her and picked up my phone from the table. "I'll call the bank again," I said calmly. Her reaction was immediate. "No." One word, sharp, fast. Not the tone of someone trying to avoid panic. The tone of someone trying to stop a door from opening. I turned toward her. Why not? Her lips parted, then closed. I watched the honest answer miss its chance to arrive. It won't change anything, she said finally. The money's gone, David. Gone. Not missing, not stolen. Gone. Final. Prepared. It was the kind of word a person uses when they have already made peace with the outcome. I stepped closer. Lauren, look at me. She hesitated, then raised her eyes to mine. And I saw it. Not fear of loss, fear of exposure. She wasn't watching me to see if I was devastated. She was watching to see how much I knew. And once I saw that, the remaining pieces didn't just fit. They snapped together, not a hack, not a mistake. A decision. You tried to move the money, I said quietly. The color drained from her face. Not all at once, slowly, like tide pulling back from shore. The silence that followed had shape. Verdict. End of options. She didn't argue. Didn't blame the bank. Didn't reach for another story. She just stood there with that tremor in her hands, and the look of someone realizing the lie had reached the end of the road. Where were you sending it? I asked. She shook her head. You don't understand. Then make me understand. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Sometimes the quietest words cut the deepest. Her voice cracked when she answered. I needed it. Not we. I. That hit harder than anything else. Not because it surprised me anymore, but because it named the betrayal with brutal precision. In 2 words, she redrew the boundaries of our life. 32 years of shared work, shared bills, shared sacrifice. And at the moment the lie finally collapsed, she reached not for partnership, but possession. I looked at her and saw something more painful than a stranger. I saw a familiar person stripped of the assumptions that had made her safe. Same face, same voice, different meaning. She folded one arm around herself, as if cold had entered the room. I needed it, she repeated, softer now. And I understood that whatever explanation came next, however tragic, pathetic, desperate or manipulative, it would not undo the worst part of what had already happened. She had not been trying to save us. She had been trying to act without me. The story came out in fragments, and somehow that made it worse. If she had confessed cleanly, maybe I could have braced for it. But this came like rot in a house you thought was solid. One warped board, one stain, one smell at a time. A man named Ryan Keller. She said the name quietly, as though saying it softly might reduce what it meant. But names take up space once they enter a room like that. Until then, the betrayal had still been partly abstract. Numbers, accounts, credentials, fraud review, cold language, financial language. Now, it had a face. An investment opportunity, she said. Even hearing the phrase made something bitter rise in my throat. It had the cheap shine of false rescue. He had told her there was a narrow window, a private placement, high return, short-term transfer. Words designed to make caution feel like weakness. He had made it sound smart, exclusive, urgent. At first it sounded almost pathetic. After everything Lauren and I had built through years of restraint and discipline, the threat had not come from some complex conspiracy. It had come wearing the oldest disguise in the world, greed dressed as salvation. But then it got uglier, because the more she spoke, the clearer it became that she had not merely been tricked. She had trusted him, listened to him, hidden things from me for him. That is a different kind of betrayal. There is a difference between being deceived and rearranging your loyalties. I was going to fix everything, she said, tears finally gathering in her eyes. I was going to double it, David. We'd be set. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it hurt too much not to. The sound that came out of me was harsh and empty. Fix everything. As if our life had been broken and she alone had the vision to repair it, as if all these years I had just been standing nearby while she carried the burden of saving us. You risked everything we built on a stranger. She flinched. Then she said the sentence that hurt more than any number ever could. He wasn't a stranger. That was the blow, not the transfers, not even the lies. That sentence, small, honest, ruinous, because suddenly the betrayal widened beyond money. Ryan Keller had existed in some private part of my wife's life long enough to matter. Messages, calls, meetings, thoughts, hours that had once belonged to the ordinary fabric of our marriage had been given elsewhere. 32 years, 32 Christmas mornings, family funerals, job losses, vacations we couldn't afford, quiet dinners, shared routines. 32 years of being the first person she told things to, and somewhere along the way, without my knowledge, I had become the man outside the door. "You lied to me," I said. There was no force left in it. Just fact. "I know," she whispered. "I was going to tell you after." After. That word hung there like something rotten. After what? After it worked? After she moved the money and came back with some triumphant version of salvation? Or after it failed, and tears became the only language she had left? I stepped back and shook my head slowly. That was the moment rage gave way to clarity. Not just clarity about what she had done, but about how she had done it. The confidence behind it. The assumption that she could keep me in the dark long enough for the truth to become irreversible. "No," I said quietly. "You weren't going to tell me." I knew it with absolute certainty. If the bank had not called, I would have walked into that kitchen carrying the same trust I woke up with. I would have looked at my wife and seen my partner, not a strategist. I would have continued living inside a version of my own life that she had already begun editing without me. And that realization hit harder than the money ever could. Money is measurable. You can count the damage, chase recovery, freeze accounts, hire lawyers, rebuild. But the knowledge that the person beside you was prepared to let you remain ignorant while she risked the foundation under your feet, that enters someplace money cannot reach. It changes the past as much as the present. It makes you revisit ordinary absences and wonder which ones hid secrets. It turns distraction into suspicion, silence into evidence, familiarity into a costume. Lauren was crying now, really crying. Her face had gone slack with collapse, and maybe there was regret in it, maybe shame, maybe fear. But none of it changed the central truth standing between us. She had counted on me not finding out until it was too late. By late afternoon, the hard facts were clearer. The account was not empty, not even close. Most of the money was still there, frozen, flagged, under review, but still ours. The bank had caught enough in time. Forms could be filed, statements taken, security measures added, paper trails followed. The money had boundaries, procedures, departments. Trust did not. Lauren sat at the kitchen table, smaller somehow. Not physically smaller, something else. The collapse of posture, the absence of resistance, the strange dimming that happens when a person has run out of stories and is forced to sit in plain truth. Morning suspicion had given way to the dull, colorless weight of evening. One coffee cup still sat near the sink. Another had a dark ring drying at the bottom. The clock kept ticking with soft indifference, as if time hadn't noticed anything had broken in that room. "I made a mistake," she said. Her voice was flat, tired. To someone standing outside the wreckage, it might have sounded reasonable, human, regrettable, survivable, a mistake. But that word protects the self. Mistakes suggest miscalculation. They soften intention. They imply that the damage belongs to outcome, not choice. I looked at her for a long time before answering, and I felt the divide inside me more clearly than I had all day. One part of me, the older part, made of anniversaries and shared winters and hospital waiting rooms and laughter borrowed from difficult years, felt something dangerously close to compassion. That part remembered the woman she had once been, the one who sang under her breath while making dinner, the one who stayed awake with me when my mother was dying, even though she had work at 6 in the morning. The one who could squeeze my hand under a table without a word and steady me when I was drifting. Love, if it lasts long enough, does not vanish cleanly. Even when betrayal enters the room, love lingers in reflex, in memory, in the instinct to soften when the other person looks broken. But another part of me, colder, steadier, less willing to lie to itself, was still listening to that 8:17 phone call. Still hearing James say deliberate, still hearing partially completed, still hearing blocked attempts. That part of me knew something the softer part wanted to resist. Regret after exposure is not innocence before action. Tears do not rewrite sequence. Collapse does not erase intention. This wasn't a mistake, I said at last. It was a choice. She closed her eyes, not dramatically, just like a person receiving the impact she had hoped might miss her. And for the first time all day, she did not argue. Maybe because even she understood the difference by then. Mistakes happen in moments. Choices build themselves step by step. A password entered. A transfer started. A lie prepared. A husband observed and measured. Silence maintained until silence failed. The room fell quiet again. But now the silence was different. Not uncertain. Clear. I knew what had happened. I knew what she had done. And more painfully than either of those things, I knew what it meant. The money could probably be recovered. The account could be secured. Lawyers could be called. Those were tasks, hard tasks, ugly tasks, necessary tasks. But what sat across from me at that kitchen table was not a task. It was the end of a misunderstanding I had been living inside for years. I had mistaken duration for safety, history for immunity, familiarity for loyalty. That was the part I could not put back. I reached for my keys on the counter. The metal clicked softly in my hand. Lauren looked up at me, her face blotched from crying. But there was something else there now, something rawer than guilt. The first real understanding that this day was not going to end in explanation. That there are moments after which words no longer repair anything, because the truth has already done its work. "David," she said, voice trembling. "Where are you going?" I stood near the doorway and looked down the hall at the fading light stretching across the floorboards. The house still looked like our house. Same walls, same furniture, same framed photographs of vacations and birthdays and holidays that suddenly felt like records from another country. Then I answered, "To protect what's left." And even as I said it, I knew I was no longer talking only about the money, not the account, not the house, not even the life we had built together. Because a shared life is only partly made of routine and property. The deeper structure is trust. And once trust has been used against you, the blueprint changes forever. What remained now was not the marriage I thought I had, not the future I believed we were guarding together. What remained was something more stripped down and more essential, the part of me that had not yet agreed to disappear inside someone else's deception. The part that still knew the difference between mercy and self-erasure, between grief and surrender. Because sometimes the greatest loss is not what someone tries to take from you. It is what you finally realize they were never protecting with you in the first place. Not the money, not security, not the future, but the belief that the person beside you was standing guard over it with you at all.